So let's talk about nulls. Nulls is a special kind of data that represents a field which its value was not yet set. For example, so when I do string s and I don't assign a value to it, s will be equals to null. Let's put a breakpoint over here and run our code. We can see that s is equal to nulls. Now, when we think of strings, sometimes we think of an empty string, which is something like this, but an empty string is different than null. Okay, so if I try to ask if s is equal to empty string, I will get false, because these are two different things. Null is an empty value. It's not an empty string, it's a non-value. Just like when you're using it in SQL databases or stuff like that. Now, if we set a value to the field, we say s equals to null. Let's put a breakpoint over here and see how the code executes. Okay, so s is null before I've set its value, and if I go to the next line of code, we can see that s is now null. So until we set a value to a field, its value is null. Now, that special type has some benefits. You can know that something was not set, and you also can check equivalence to null. Okay, let's say using system diagnostics and say, well, if s is null, debug right line, s is null, and now what we'll get over here is an error from the studio saying us that we are using an unassigned local variable, and this is quite nice. Visual Studio and C# will try to safeguard us. They've seen that we've defined the string s over here, and they see that we haven't set it, so they will tell us we are using an unassigned local variable. So as we said, until it's set, it's equal to null, but sometimes Visual Studio can help us and let us know, hey, don't make this mistake. But I want to insist on this mistake, so I'm going to say is equal to null. And let's run this. Okay, and we'll break over here. And we can see that we'll get into this code because it's equal to null. Perfect. Now, problematics of null. If I try to do anything on a field that its value is null, I will get a null reference exception. Let's do that. Let's see how that works. Let's say I want to do s2 string. Okay. Let's run our code. When we do that, we will get the null reference exception. And this is an exception that you'll see quite a lot. It is saying object reference not set to an instance of an object. Again, this is a string that you're going to get used to seeing. And that means that we are accessing s, but s doesn't have a value. S is null. Okay, and before we want to do anything with s, we have to set its value to a valid value. For example, we can say s is equal to null, and now our code will be perfectly legal. And as you see, it proceeded to our breakpoint. Perfect. So if we try to do anything on something that is null, we'll get the null reference exception. And null indicates a value that doesn't exist. Now, another point I want to focus on, as you've seen, when we did not assign it, okay, and try to build our code, Visual Studio will tell us use of unassigned local variable s. But that only works for local variables, which means variables within the scope of a method. If I define string s at my class level, Visual Studio will not give us that error when we build, but will give us that error in runtime. Okay? So it will give us the object reference not set because string s was defined but was never set to, and it didn't have any way of knowing that it was never set to. That's why it couldn't give it to us when we compile. Usually these kind of variables will be set in the constructor. So s equals to default value. Perfect. And now our code will work because s will be the default values that we've set over here.